let's look at some of my favorite tips and tricks that I've just learned by experimenting a lot. And you'll learn your own tips and tricks and add them to your kind of memory. You know, it's like when you learn anything new, you start out really, it starts really awkwardly, like say learning to drive. Do you remember when you learned to drive and you had to think about every little thing? And now we drive and never give it a thought. Well, that same kind of muscle memory and knowledge and intuition will develop over time. And you'll be able to make your own list, and I'm sure you have some already. But these are the ones that I've captured in the book, and so I want to share them with you and just demonstrate a little bit. So number one is using a mother color or main color to create harmony, and this is something that helps with composition and also harmony, just keeping everything together. And you don't need a lot of it. So for example, in this spread, I used a tiny bit of burnt umber, a tiny bit, in every color in here. So I mixed the color I wanted and then added a tiny bit of something. So it can be really a tiny bit of anything. You could pick, experiment. You could pick a coral red. You could pick a, you just don't want to pick anything that's super highly pigmented or overpowering. And burnt umber can be that way. So just the teeniest little bit gave everything a sense that even though these colors are quite different, they harmonize. So that is something I recommend. And like I said, it's just, you're talking about a tiny bit. So let's say you're going to paint with an orange, okay? And then you're going to use, let's say, an aqua, in your painting. Well, if I say I'm just going to take a tiny bit of this sky blue, then it's going to alter both colors and every other color I use. I don't know, my orange seems to be, here it is. I dried a little bit. So here's my orange straight out of the tube. And if I just add a tiniest little bit, and this is a complement to orange, blue is, so it'll subdue it a little bit. So there's my orange with a tiny bit of blue. And let's take the turquoise and add a teeny tiny bit of blue. Start with a clean brush, just so that I can show you kind of, get a tiny bit of that blue. Now, on the turquoise, I can add a little more of the blue because they're in the same family, so I'm not introducing a complement, which could take it to mud quickly. And so here's a turquoise with a little bit of blue. And let's pick a third color. Let's say we wanted to use, I'm trying to think of something that's not, let's say an opera red, which is a really bright fluorescent-y color that I use a lot. And it often needs a toning down, which would mean adding a complement. But if we're saying we're going to add a little bit of this blue to every color, there's our opera, teeny bit of blue. See, if I add too much, I alter it. So I'm just going to grab there we go. Just wanted a little bit. And there it is with a little bit. So if we take each of these colors just straight from the tube, let's see if you can tell the difference between the ones that have the mother color and the ones that don't. So here's the orange. There's blue in my orange. That won't work at all. How did that happen? I don't remember Okay, there's the orange. You can see it's much brighter. Oh, I know what happened. I put the wrong top on there. Oh, goodness. Lesson learned, right? And then I'll take the turquoise. I want to get a really clean brush. Let me just get a new one so that I don't alter the experiment by using a brush with some color in it. There's the turquoise. And let's get the pink. So I hope you can see the difference, which is that these, are all brighter, but they don't blend as well. They pop, and they kind of get to one of my next tips and tricks, which is creating for the brain. They are more jarring, if you look at it this way, which is these three. They're a bit more jarring than when they've been harmonized. So that is the mother color concept. Let's look at the keeping a bit of color in the brush. All right, so that creates something similar in the sense that I will often paint and not wash out my brush completely. I'll have a paper towel handy. And it depends what direction I'm going, because if I'm doing, say, warm colors or reds, yellows, oranges, I don't need to wash the brush as much. And even if I'm going into a blue, I can harmonize by just keeping a bit of paint in my brush. So let's look at this one. Let's see what's the paper towel gives it away, because it's been sitting in water while we talked. And you can see there's some pinky orange in there. And what I'll do is leave that, and often I'll paint, if you watch me paint or take my classes, I'll just go from one color to the other, and over time you'll develop that sense to not get mud. You'll know that you can't have a bunch of blue on your brush and then go into orange, for example. So when you do a complement colors, which are colors on the opposite end of the color wheel, you have to make sure there's just a very little bit of that complement in your brush. Otherwise, it will turn to mud. So I'll be painting along, and let's say I'm painting, some leaves with this pink, and I want to vary the color a little bit. I know that I can go into the orange. I've still got pink in my brush, and I can come back in here and like here and bring that together. Now, if I were to try to, with all this pink and orange on my brush, grab some turquoise. Turquoise is not bad in terms of, because it will still be a color, but it's going to neutralize it, which it did, turned it to a gray. But there's a lot of white in turquoise, in this turquoise anyway. So it didn't go brown, but if I were to have orange, see, now I've got a few different things in my brush, right? I've got some turquoise and pink, and if I were to get some orange and then get too much of this blue, switch to that, you can see that it goes, mud pretty quickly. Now, you may want a neutral like this. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just knowing, I don't want it here. Maybe I want it in the stem. So it's just knowing what direction you're going. But I really don't wash my brush that much. And that's developed over time. Now, what I will do, though, is say, okay, I've got orange in here now, or right now I've got mud in there. I'm not going to wash it, but I'm going to blot it, and I'll take my paper towel like so, and I will get most of the color out. Then, let's see if I've taken enough color out that I can do a turquoise or a blue, and still get a little bit of that bit of color effect in my brush. Yeah, so here's blue, which is the sky blue, which is a much brighter color, but because I've got a little bit, can you see that little bit of orange and pink still left in there? It's altering it to make it, a nice blue, kind of a toned down blue. So that's just something you learn by experimenting, you know, but you don't always, I used to, when I started, you know, wash the brush every time completely out. And I realized that what that does is it can first of all, it wastes paint, and it can create more of a disjointed composition. Whereas if you just leave a little bit in there, depending on what you've got and what direction you're going color-wise, which again, you just develop over time, then you can, you know, harmonize better. So like I've got a little bit of yellow, I've still got blue in my brush, see? So I know now, since I know about color, that if I want a green, there's no sense in washing that blue out, right? That makes no sense because I'm going to be needing blue to make green. And greens I usually almost always make rather than buy. So it's perfect to grab that yellow with the blue that's already in there and make my green. And then I can tone down my green if I want by adding a little bit of orange, which is the complement. I can brighten it back up by adding more yellow. And you know, the sky's the limit. But don't necessarily think that you always want to wash out your brush. Let's try it again. Let me blot out without rinsing. So let's see, I've got some green in there mostly. Green is a complement to orange, so if I, let's turn the page, if I were to grab orange right now, I'm going to get a more muddy color, but it could be a pretty orange. See how it's a little more muddy? And that's because I had green in my brush. So it's just knowing and experimenting, really, because that's how you develop that sense. So you can get to where you're not really using as much paint, you're not rinsing as much. I'm getting some of that pink, but I've still got that orange in my brush. But I blotted most of it out, so I'm getting the pink, but I'm getting some bits of orange in there, which is a nice color. So that's the idea, that's number 2, the idea of keeping a bit of color in your brush.